When you're ready to start drawing some artwork on your artboard, you might want to start with some of what Illustrator calls primitive shapes or native shapes. It's here under the rectangle tool on the toolbar, and you can see that there are several different shapes. There's the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle, the ellipse, polygon, star, and flare. We'll slowly go through each of these so you can see how they work. Once you have the tool selected, the tool will show you a crosshair on the artboard, and all you need to do is click, drag, and release to create a shape. To create another shape, just click, drag, and release. You can click, drag, and release in any direction, and you can make shapes on top of other shapes, and you can see how these are overlapping here. You can make as many as you like at any size that you want. And if you wanted to make a perfect square, hold down your Shift key to constrain the shape. As you can see, each of the shapes is being filled with white with a black stroke, but you can easily change these colors by selecting any color in your swatches panel, like so. Once you have a color selected in your swatches, and notice that the color is selected here, as well as here, and as well as here, that color is the next color that you would be using when you create your next shape. Let's go to the rounded rectangle tool. When you're creating rounded rectangles, you just click and drag in any direction, any size, just like with a regular rectangle. And if you want to constrain, hold down your Shift key while you're clicking and dragging and release. You can also control the curvature of the rounded rectangle before you release your mouse by clicking your up, down, left, right arrows. If you click your left arrow, you can turn your rounded rectangle into a straight-edged rectangle. If you click your right arrow, it becomes as curvy as it could possibly be, and the up-down arrows allow you to toggle incrementally between fully curved and fully hard-edged. When you have the curve that you like, then you can release your mouse. That radius for your corner will remain intact unless you change it at another time. Let's take a look now at the ellipse tool. Let's change the color so we can have a little more artwork going on our artboard. To create a circle, just click and drag, and depending on which direction and how far you drag, you can create circular shapes or elliptical shapes. To constrain your circle, you guessed it, you'll hold down your Shift key, click, drag, and release. I usually don't let go of my Shift key until after I've let go of my mouse. Underneath the ellipse is the polygon tool, and the polygon allows you to draw shapes with multiple sides. You can use your up-down arrows on your keyboard to increase or decrease the number of sides on your polygon. The minimum number of sides is 3 for a triangle, but you can easily increase the number of sides for however many sided polygon that you need. Let's make that one a different color too. Just remember up for adding and down on your arrow key for subtracting. If you want to hold down the Shift key to constrain your shape, that usually puts the baseline level with the bottom of your document window. Holding down my Shift key, you can see that before I hold it down, the shape can go in any direction, and holding it down, the Shift key before I release my mouse, constrains the shape. Now underneath the polygon is a shape called the star tool, and we'll use another color for that. For the star tool, click and drag and release, clicking and dragging in any direction. If you hold down your Shift key, you can constrain the shape. You could also control the number of points on your star by, you guessed it, using your up-down arrows on your keyboard. This only works before you've released your mouse, so make sure you have the correct number of points before you release. Once you release, you can't go back in and modify the number of points. You would have to create a brand new shape instead. While you're dragging, you can constrain with the Shift key. You could also hold down the Command or Control key to modify the radius of the points on your star. Once you have that radius set, all subsequent shapes will match that same radius. To get it back to the more regular looking star shape, just hold down your Command or Control key while you're dragging. So you get it a little bit closer to what you want. You may need to increase or decrease the number of points so you can get it just right. The flare tool is the last tool in this toolbar, and this gives you what looks like a lens flare. All you need to do is click on the artboard and drag out a flare. The flare can be any size, and you usually have to click away from it so that you can see it properly. What's neat about the flare tool is that it picks up the underlying colors and makes a lens flare based on the underlying colors. So let's move it up right here on top of 3 different colors, and you can see that it's sort of shifting in hue a little bit. Let's make another one further below, much larger. You can see how it's really changing all the objects below. If you ever want to select and remove an object from your artboard, you'll need to use your black arrow. There's 2 arrows at the top of the screen. The black arrow is called your selection tool. The white arrow is called your direct selection tool. In most instances, when you need to select and move an object, you'll choose your black arrow, which is accessible with the V key on the keyboard. To select an object, just click on it and click your delete key. You can select multiple objects by clicking and then shift-clicking, then pressing delete. So if I wanted to get rid of this one and this one and this one, I'm just adding to my selection by shift-clicking and clicking my delete key. When you have an object on the artboard, you are certainly not stuck in any way with the coloration of that shape. So for instance, if I wanted to modify this star shape, I can modify the colors in a few different places. What I normally do is start here on the toolbar and double-click to open up the Color Picker dialog box. When the Color Picker dialog box comes open, you'll see there's a rainbow of colors here in the center. You can toggle the slider up and down to find the hue that you'd like to work with. And then once you have that hue selected, you can click anywhere inside this square to select a color. Notice that the pre-existing color is on bottom and the newly selected color is on top. When you have everything selected the way you like it, click OK. Your selected object will then take on the properties of the selected color. If you wanted to modify the stroke needs to be active. And just as with the fill, you can double-click on the stroke to open up the color picker. Choose any color you like. Now you can't really see the stroke very well because it's only 1 point in size. So if you wanted to modify the stroke weight or width, you'd have to select the object first and go to the stroke panel. Now, anytime there's a panel that has a double-sided arrow and you don't see very much, it probably means that there's a lot of stuff hiding underneath it. So click it 1 or 2 or 3 times until you see everything that you could possibly see. Here in the stroke panel at the top, we can specify the weight. There are a bunch of presets that you can choose from this drop-down flyout menu. Because I've selected the object first, I can easily apply a different stroke weight to that object. Another thing you can do is modify the caps of your strokes. That would be any of the endpoints around the edges. Right now, the default cap is a butt cap, which means that it goes straight to the point at the end and then gets snipped off like a pair of scissors. You can also switch it to a round cap, which will give it a rounded corner, as well as a projecting cap. Now, we're probably not seeing it on this particular shape because we're not dealing with an open path. And I'll quickly draw a straight line to show you that. So there's the, let's zoom in. So there is the regular cap, the butt cap. Here is the rounded cap, and you can see that it extends past the edge in a nice rounded corner. And then there's a projecting cap, which is cut off like the original butt cap, but extends a little bit past it. I'm going to zoom back out and we'll show you that star shape again, because the corners are what I wanted to show you for the star. Let's move in right here. For the corners, the default corner is set to a miter join, and a miter join will determine how far beyond a corner or an elbow the point will create a nice shiny point. You could also switch between round join, which gives a nice curvy ends to your elbows, or switch to this third option, which is a bevel join, which looks like it's snipped off. Now, the first way, we had a nice point over on this side, but a blunt edge on the other. We might need to increase the miter limit to see those points. Now, depending on your shape and the stroke width and everything else, the miter limit number may need to be different for your particular object. So if you ever are not seeing the points, try changing the miter limit. Now, the stroke itself can be aligned in 3 separate places. It can be aligned right on the path on even sides, inside and outside of the path. It can be on the inside of the path or on the outside of the path. And this is really helpful when you're combining multiple shapes. What's more, you can modify the stroke to be a dashed line. When you click this dashed line option, and let's make the stroke a little bit thinner here, you can see that it looks like there's been little snips cut out of it. You can modify the dashed line by specifying the dash and the gap width in points. So if you wanted to have a larger gap or a smaller gap, you could just type that in. And your point size don't need to be uniform. We need a little bit bigger there. They don't need to be uniform in size. You can certainly do something like 12 and then 7 and then 23 and then 4 or something like that. It's completely up to you. So your dash line does not need to be uniform or regular. Let's remove those here, and we'll take the dash line off of the object. Actually, let's go back to the dash line because I want to show you what will happen. Notice that these are blunt edged. What will happen if you change this to a round cap? Now your edges get nice and curvy like little hot dogs. Now, if you wanted to, you could also create dots. And to do that, you would have to change the dash to 0 and then give it something like an 8-point gap between them. There's your little dotted line. Another thing is where the line falls on your object. And this is probably more apparent when you're dealing with a rectangle shape. So let's go like this. And you can see how at the top right, the circle is right on the corner, but there's a little bit of overlap here, and this one doesn't quite make it to the corner. If you have it on this first option, this will just put whatever the line is right on the outer edges. But if you use this other option, this will sort of realign all of the dots equally so that your dotted line or whatever shape line you happen to be using will fall nice and evenly around the corners, which is a really great addition to Adobe Illustrator. Let's zoom back out and we'll talk for a second about creating more precise shapes. Another keyboard shortcut that you could use while you're working is you can always double click on the zoom tool to get to 100% or double click on the hand tool to get to fill the workspace with your document. We'll go with this one. Now, if you need to draw super precise shapes, if you select a tool and then click once on your artboard, you can bring that Tools dialog box open. You can then specify the exact width and height of the desired shape before clicking OK and having it being drawn on your artboard. So if you needed, for instance, a 3.5 inch by 2 inch size, maybe you're going to make a business card, all you have to do is plug in the values, hit OK, and your object will drop onto the artboard. And that goes for any of the shapes. For the ellipse tool, you can drop in the width and height, and if you want to make it a perfect circle, just link those two together before you plug in your value. The rounded rectangle has an additional option in that you can specify the corner radius before you begin. Like so. With the polygon tool, you can specify the number of sides before you go, like so. And as you can guess with the star tool, clicking once brings up the radius 1 and radius 2 options, as well as the number of points. So this gives you the ultimate in control over your star shapes. And again, if you need to delete any artwork from your artboard, all you need to do is select one or more objects and press the delete key. Now you notice as we've been working, we have all these objects layered one on top of the other. You can specify the stacking order of any object on the artboard. So for instance, if I wanted to bring this polygon shape forward, I can use the Object Arrange menu to bring it forward, bring it to the front, send it backward, or send it all the way to the back. You can also access that menu through the Context menu by right-clicking on the shape. It's there at the bottom. So if I say bring it to the front, it will bring it all the way to the front of the artboard, and everything else will fall behind. You could also do things like grouping objects. Let's bring the star to the front, like so. So if I wanted to put these two in a group, all I need to do is select them both. So you can click and drag across the shapes with your black arrow, or click one and then shift click the other to select them. And you can do this for as many shapes as you like. Using the context menu again, you can choose the group option to join them into a group. That way, when you move one, you move them both as a unit. You can then scale, transform, recolor, and do other changes to that group if you like. If you want to make a copy of any object, all you need to do is select that object, hold down your Alt or Option key until you see the white arrow on top of the black arrow, then click and drag a copy away from the original. If you need to constrain where the copy goes, like you need it to go exactly to the right of your existing one, hold down your Alt or Option key until you see the white arrow, start to drag, and then hold down your Shift key and you will constrain the copy. If you hold down the Alt or Option key, then hold down the Shift key and start to drag, you're actually deselecting first. So you must select first, Alt or Option, begin the drag, then hold down the Shift key to constrain it. Then release, then let go of your keyboard shortcuts. If you ever need to select multiple shapes on your artboard at once, you can do it, as I said, by clicking and dragging a marquee around the shapes with the black arrow. Anything that falls within that marquee shape will be selected. You could then modify those objects if you wanted to. For instance, I just deleted them and then undid that deletion and put them back on my artboard. You could also, though, use this lasso tool at the top, which is accessible with the Q key on your keyboard. With the lasso tool, you can rope around any selected set of objects, and anything that falls within those boundaries will also be selected. You can then move those objects. Oops, looks like we didn't get everything, but you could then move all those objects or group all those objects or delete all those objects, anything that was selected inside of the lasso. There's another selection tool called the Magic Wand tool that you can use to select objects that have similar properties. So you'll notice that I clicked on this rounded rectangle with pink, and all the objects that have a pink fill were also selected at the same time. So that's a really handy tool when you need to select similar objects. To deselect objects, just click away from the artboard or away from the selection to deselect. Now notice when you have an object selected, this bounding box appears around the selection's outer edges. You can modify the shape or transform the shape using those bounding box anchor points and handles. Let's use this one instead, since I think this will be easier for us to see against a white background. You can put your cursor on any of the anchor points around the outer edges of the shape, and then click and drag to scale from that point. Notice as I'm clicking and dragging, I'm dragging away from the opposite anchor point on the opposite side. But you can click and drag in any direction. From a side point, you're only going to go along one plane, and that goes for top and bottom dragging. If you drag from a diagonal corner point, you can also drag up and down, left or right, but you'll be constraining to its opposite corner. Now, if you need to scale and constrain the proportions of the drag while you're dragging, hold down the Shift key, and that will ensure that your size will grow or shrink proportional to its original size. In addition to scaling, if you put your cursor around the outer edges of the shape, you'll see a double-sided arrow. This will allow you to rotate your object, and notice these smart guides that are appearing. This gives us the angle of the rotation while we're dragging, and the green lines are telling us that we could be in alignment with other objects on our artboard. When you have the rotation that you like, you can release your mouse. For instance, if we wanted to rotate the star, just click and drag until we have it the way we want it and release. You can select and move any object at any time. The stacking order of your objects will be retained while you click and drag them. And then again, if you ever need to change the stacking order, you would select the object, go to the Arrange menu, and choose the desired location. In this case, I'd like to send that all the way to the back. Another keyboard shortcut that you might like to know about is when you're drawing, usually click and drag and you draw from the insertion point outward. If you ever need to draw from the center, however, let's choose a different color here. You can hold down your Alt or Option key and then click and drag, and that allows you to draw from the center of your object. You can also combine that with the Shift key to constrain the shape while you're dragging it. That works for any of the native shapes. So holding down your Alt and Option key, starting to drag. If you need to constrain, hold down the Shift key as well, and only release when you're ready, and then you can let go of the keyboard shortcuts. Double-click on the Zoom tool so you can see your workspace in the center of the screen. Actually, let's zoom out a little bit more. And what I'll do is I will select everything, and I'll move it off the workspace into the scratch area. Then we can double-click our Zoom tool to be nice and close to everything else. We'll take a look now at all of the line tools, which are next to the shape tools. There's several different line tools that you can use to draw with. There's the regular line segment, the arc, the spiral, the rectangular grid, and the polar grid. To create a line, just click and drag in any direction. Notice that this path is taking on the attributes of the previously selected object. You can modify that at any time by modifying the stroke. I could turn off the dashed line, and I can make this thicker or thinner at any time. So again, dragging the line tool, clicking and dragging in any direction. You can make as many lines as you like. Once you release your mouse, you've released the path. Any subsequent click will allow you to create a brand new line. If you want to modify any of the lines, just select them, one or more. So for instance, if I wanted to select all 3 of those lines and then change the color of those, all I have to do is select them all at once, and that property would be changed for the entire selection. If you want to draw a line and constrain, hold down your Shift key. It will constrain to a 45 or a 90-degree angle while you're dragging. And if you need to create a specific line length, just click once on the artboard. So all of these features work with all of the tools, whether you want to hold down the Shift key to constrain, whether you want to draw from the center with the Alt or Option key, and whether you want to create a specific measurement, just click on the artboard with the tool selected. So if we need a 3-inch line, just click once and that line will be dropped right onto our artboard. Let's choose the Arc tool now. With the Arc tool, you click and drag. You can click and drag in any direction. And notice as I click, the shape of the arc changes. So you'll need to drag and get it into the right place. Now normally if you drag and see the Smart Guide, it looks like you're getting a quarter of a circle. You could then modify the shape of that line by selecting it with your black arrow, holding down your Shift key, and constraining. Now notice that the stroke weight was changed as I was scaling, and that's because we turn on in our preferences to scale strokes and effects. If we turn that off and we resize the object, the thickness would remain the same. You could always go back and change the thickness again at a later time. And like before, clicking once will give you the opportunity to specify the X-Y axis, as well as whether or not the path is open or closed. You could choose the base along the X or Y axis, as well as modify the slope, and even fill the arc in with a selected color. When you're done, just click OK. Spiral tool works similarly, just click and drag. If you use your up-down arrow keys, you can increase the twirl in the center of the spiral. And the more you drag, the bigger the spiral gets. So increasing and decreasing the spiral in the center with the up-down arrows. You can also change the orientation of the spiral by rotating it as you drag before you release your mouse. And if you need a specific spiral, click once on the artboard and specify the radius, decay, number of segments, and style. Click OK to let that spiral be drawn on the artboard for you. The rectangular grid tool, you click and drag, and before you release your mouse, you can increase or decrease the number of rows with the up-down arrows and the number of columns with the left-right arrows. When you have the shape the way you like it, release, and that shape will be drawn on the artboard for you. If you want to specify the exact number of rows and columns, click once on the artboard. The rectangular grid tool options dialog box will open for you, and you can specify all of the dimensions and everything you need here. When you have it the way you like it, click OK, and that shape will be drawn on the board for you. Lastly, the polar grid works pretty much in the same way. Clicking and dragging up, down, left, right arrows will determine the number of segments and the number of pie slices. So you can do something like this to create a cool radial banded effect. And if you need to create specific numbers, just click once on the artboard and the polar grid tool options dialog box will give you everything that you need to create the exact shaped polar grid that you need for your project. Click OK when you're done. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more, and I'm going to grab everything and then shift everything back over again to the left so that I can show you the next couple of tools that I think are pretty interesting. Now, as I mentioned before, you can scale any object by selecting it and holding down the Shift key to constrain. You can rotate it by dragging around the handlebars at the side. Same goes for grouped objects. You can scale it up or down with or without the Shift key. You can rotate it. As long as the object is selected, you can modify it while it's selected, like so. There are some tools that you can use for erasing and cutting, and you need to have some shapes on your artboard before you begin. So now's the perfect time to show you about this. The eraser tool, which can be accessed with the E key plus the Shift key on the keyboard. With the eraser key, you can modify the size of the brush head by clicking on your left or right bracket keys on your keyboard. The size of the eraser will determine the size of the hole or chunk that you bite out of any object. So you can click once on any shape, or you can click and drag and release. If the shape was a closed shape to begin with, the shape will continue to be closed. If the shape was open, like a path, you would just essentially be cutting it in half. So if you do not have any object selected at all, the eraser will erase through everything that it touches. But if you do have an object selected, the eraser will be constrained to only erase the selected object, and it will try to close paths wherever it can. You can then select the individual pieces and reposition them anywhere on your artboard. Reminds me of a little squid. Now, underneath your eraser are two cutting tools. There's the scissors tool and the knife tool, and they each work in slightly different ways. Let's look at the scissors tool first, and we'll zoom in a little bit. With the scissors tool, you click on a path, and it's almost like cutting with a little scissors. Once you do that, you can actually clip away an individual piece of an object. And notice here that some of the fill and the stroke came with that little piece. You need not have an object selected, but you could have it selected to isolate it from other objects nearby. And sometimes you get this dialog box that comes open telling you to use the scissors tool on a segment or on an anchor point, but not on an end point of a path, like so. Again, you can move the individual pieces away. So think of scissors really like having a scissors in your hand. Now, the knife tool works a little bit differently, and it's almost like the eraser in that with the knife, all you need to do is click and drag through a selection. The object needs to be selected beforehand, though, so if you don't have anything selected on your artboard, nothing is going to get cut. So if I wanted to cut this object, I would have to select it first and then drag my knife through it. You could then deselect the object and move the individual pieces away. The knife tool also will try to close your shapes for you. So here's a circle shape. Grabbing my knife, it's selected. Cutting through, I have two shapes now, one separate from the other. After you're done playing around, you can choose whether or not you want to save this work for later. I usually think it's a good idea when you're new to Illustrator to save your play areas so that you can always go back and look at them later. You can learn a lot from just playing. When you're ready to save your file, go to the File Save menu. You can save a file that has already been named, or to save a file as a new name, choose the Save As option. You can then specify the location you'd like to save the document into, give it a new name, click the Save button, I'll click Cancel, and we're ready to move on to the next section.